Of all the patterns in my sewing collection, the lander pants with the zipper expansion by True Bias are by far my most sewn pattern. I love these. I have them in several shorts versions, a couple pants versions, and I'd love to show you exactly how to sew your own pants. And I totally understand if you don't want to watch all the way through, and you can use the timestamps below to reference as you work through the pattern. Let's get started. I already pre-cut all of my fabric, and just keep in mind that you'll need the original pattern booklet and the expansion pattern booklet. And then we'll get started on step 1, which is to make sure that you have transferred all your notches and symbols, and you will be fusing your interface to the wrong side of the curved edge of the front pocket piece, the waistband, and the left fly. Let's go on to step 2, which is to sew the darts on both back pieces and press the excess fabric to the back. So you'll be doing this with both back pieces and just pinning from the top to the bottom of the dart, and don't be too paranoid if the bottom isn't perfect. That'll be tucked nicely underneath the back pockets, but just do the best you can. You'll do this on both back pieces. It creates a really nice shape on the back of the pants. That's the purpose of these darts. Alright, we're going to start on step 3. We're going to fold that top edge down 1/4 inch, and then you'll flip it the opposite way and fold it down again along that notch. Step 4 is to sew pretty much around the entire pocket except for that top folded edge. And this creates a guideline when you're doing the next step, which is to press in those sides. So, like you see I'm doing here, you'll clip the corners, and then you'll turn that top folded edge right side out. Push those corners out so that you get a nice point, and then you'll continue to turn that pocket around by pressing those sides. And you'll use that stitch line as a guide, so it's pretty much a 1/2 inch all the way around. Step 5 is to make sure that the folded section on the top of the pocket is an even width, and then you are going to edge stitch all the way across on that fold, about 1/8 of an inch. And this is a really pretty detail on the pocket, but it's also very functional, and it keeps that fold secure. Alright, let's go on to step 6. Which is to secure that back pocket to the back pants, which is really exciting. So you're going to pin that back pocket on. You'll use the little dots that you made from the original pattern pieces, and here I am using both sides just to line up the pockets, make sure they're in the exact same spot on both sides so that they don't look uneven when you're wearing them. When you're happy with the placement on both sides, you are going to edge stitch around the sides and the bottom at about 1/8 of an inch. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then you'll put these back pant pieces aside for a little while. So just take your time doing this step. Alright, let's start on step 7, which is to trim about 1/16 of an inch off of your pocket pieces on the side, the long edge, the bottom, and the rounded edge. Step 8 is to pin the main fabric to the lining fabric with right sides together, and then you'll stitch around the long side, the bottom, and the curved edge. You'll leave the top and the side unstitched. And just notice that the lining is slightly smaller, and this will make sure that the main fabric is showing completely around all the edges. So step 9 is to trim down the seam allowance to reduce the bulk, clip the corners, and turn your pockets right side out. Give them a good press, and then you are going to edge stitch along the curved edge of the pocket at 1/4 inch. And after you turned your pockets right side out, you really shouldn't be able to see the lining. If so, you can press it under a little bit more. So here I am doing that edge stitching around the curved edge of the pockets, and you'll repeat this. Step 10 is to pin the pockets to the corresponding fronts. You'll match up the notches from the original pattern, and you'll edge stitch around the 2 straight edges at 1/8 of an inch. So you won't do anything at the curved edge and the top or side. But you also are going to baste, so you'll crank up your stitch length to a 5, and you'll baste the top and the side. And then repeat this on the other leg. Step 11 says to finish the seam allowances of each of the inner legs separately, and for this you can either serge or zigzag or just use pinking shears, which I do later on. And then you're going to take the front piece and its corresponding back piece, and right sides together, you will pin these all the way down. Take your time doing this. The back leg piece is slightly longer than the front, so you'll be stretching it a little bit to fit, but use those notches and just take your time sewing all the way down, and repeat this on the other leg. Here I'm giving my seam allowance a nice press before I switch from the original Lander Pants instruction booklet to the expansion booklet, and you'll be starting here on step 12. Grab your left pant piece, front pant piece, and your new zipper expansion left fly piece, and you're going to transfer the dot from there, and you'll be using this in future steps, so do that really carefully. Make sure you finish the seam allowance on the right and left crotch, either with pinking shears or serge or zigzagged, and go ahead and pin these pieces together with the right sides touching. Pin it from the back, where the back pockets are, to that dot that you just transferred. So here I'm just lining up my pattern pieces again and transferring the dot to the opposite leg too, just so I can make sure that it's lined up completely. I usually like to have the dot on the inside and the outside of the pattern pieces, even though it doesn't say you need to do that, but just so I can make sure that I'm sewing to the right spot. I like to have it everywhere I can possibly use it. So putting an extra pin in it here, that's going to be the stopping point. And just sew very carefully from that center back all the way down to that dot. Be really careful going around that curve. Just take your time and backstitch. Step 14 is to start out by finishing the edge of the curved side of the left fly, either a zigzag or a serger, and then with right sides touching, you'll pin the straight edge of the left fly to the center front edge of the left pants. This is the side without the fly extension. You will be stitching from the top down to the dot, that same dot that you just sewed to. So it'll end up being right above there. So sew to the dot and stop, backstitch, and then you will cut down that seam allowance that you just stitched on the fly, which will help reduce bulk. So step 15 is to press the left fly away from the left pants, and you'll include that seam allowance under there, and then you are going to understitch onto the left fly at about 1/16 of an inch inside the left fly. So you'll catch that seam allowance right underneath. It's time to start the zipper, and for this step, really rely on the illustration in the pattern booklet. You'll be placing your zipper face down so that the right edge of the zipper teeth lines up with about 1/2 inch from the seam that you just created. And just take your time here pinning down that edge, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine. Switch to your zipper foot and you'll stitch along the left side of the zipper teeth. I'm actually sewing from bottom to top just because of the way that my zipper foot is oriented. I like to have all my fabric on the left side. So once you get far enough, you can actually move your pole out of the way so that you can get a straighter line. So here I'm cutting my zipper, and then you'll make a little snip at the bottom of the zipper tape and just pin that up and out of the way. And here I'm going to switch back to my normal zipper foot, and we're actually going to be switching between them a couple more times in the coming steps. So if you're not comfortable with this yet, you definitely will be by the end of this pattern. You'll be using a couple different feet. Alright, so the next step is you'll be turning that left fly inside of the left front. And once you have your regular presser foot back on, we're going to be basting around the curved edge of the left fly at about 1/2 inch. And you're more than welcome to draw this line with chalk or with a pencil to use as a guide, but basically these basting stitches are your stitching guide for your fly curve. So just do your best, create a nice straight line, start at the top, and you'll end at the large dot at the bottom, and you'll sew just below that zipper stop. So just take your time, remove those pins, and I usually walk my sewing machine over the bottom of the zipper just because sewing over metal makes me a little bit nervous. And I don't show this, but you are going to want to make a little clip just beneath that dot, about 1/2 inch below the dot. And then next step, step 20, you'll turn your pants right side up and you'll stitch with a regular stitch length on top of those basting stitches, and then remove the basting stitches if need be. Next up, we're going to press in the seam allowance along the right crotch. This is the edge with the extension piece. You are going to press this in about 1/2 inch, wrong sides touching from the waistline all the way down to the clip that you made in your seam allowance. Once you have that edge completely pressed in, you'll want to flip your pants around right side up, unzip your zipper, and line up that newly folded edge as close to your middle zipper teeth as you can and pin this in place from top to bottom or bottom to top, whatever. You want to get that edge really nice and snug, maybe about 1/8 of an inch from those zipper teeth, if possible. And once you're done pinning, you'll want to put that zipper foot back on again. Here I keep checking just to make sure that my pants at the crotch are laying flat. So again, I'm flipping my piece around and sewing from the bottom to the top. And here you're going to start just by using a basting stitch. So crank it up to the maximum stitch length. Here I'm using a 5 on my machine. That's as long as I can go. And I'm doing this from the bottom to the top. And at some point you'll have to pass by that zipper pull. So just keep that needle down and pull the zipper pull out of your way, and then continue on. So here are my pants, right side up. I'm just going to trim any extra thread hanging around, and then we'll move on to the next step. Go ahead and set your pants aside for a second and grab the right fly, fold it in half, right sides together, and sew along the bottom slanted short edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once this is sewn together, flip the right fly right side out. You can trim down that seam allowance a little bit if you'd like to, and use a little safety pin or something to press that corner. And then you will want to finish that long edge. I use just a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine. This next step looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is, so just keep that in mind. You are going to put that right fly piece just behind that folded in seam allowance, and you'll line it up with the edge of the zipper tape. So that newly serged edge, you'll line that side up with the zipper tape from your zipper. Keep the left side of your pants out of the way here. You're not going to be sewing through those at all. And again, here I'm sewing from the bottom to the top. But you're going to sew through a bunch of layers of fabric, so right along those teeth. And whenever you need to move that zipper pull out of the way, keep the needle down and move it past. And you'll sew through all of those layers, including that right fly that you just pinned into place. Once that's sewn, check out your handiwork. Look at that zipper, admire it. Make sure that crotch is nice and flat. And just trim any threads on the back. Go ahead and start pressing that whole seam allowance along that crotch towards the left pants, and then turn it right side up, and you will be top stitching from the crotch, the bottom of the crotch seam, all the way to the back. With a 1/8 inch seam allowance, you'll sew through all the layers from the right side, starting at that dot that you marked many steps ago. Backstitch to secure that in place, and you'll end at the top back waistline. And this really helps to reinforce this crotch seam, which will get a lot of wear as you move and walk and run and dance. So this is really important. Once you're done with that step, zip up the fly. Make sure that everything is laying really flat, nicely lined up. And then we are going to do a couple bar tacks. So I just draw and chalk where exactly I want to sew, and I do this on my second machine. But you're going to make a zigzag stitch that's extremely close together, and you will just help reinforce these areas that get a lot of pressure put onto them. This is the most exciting step. It's when your fabric turns into actual pants. So pin your fabric right sides together and sew a line of basting stitches all the way down. And then once you try them on and they fit however you want them to fit, sew your normal stitch length all the way down and repeat that on the other side. I think here I ended up basting at 3/4 of an inch, and then I ended up taking them in another 1/2 inch. And then be sure to trim down your seam allowance. It can be pretty bulky from the inside of your pants. Time to get started on the belt loops. This is step 28, and the instructions say to make a loop and then turn it inside out, but I've mentioned before on my channel, I do not like that way of doing this, and I have ripped holes in my fabric before. So what I do is I fold this long strip with wrong sides together and fold and press that, and then again I fold each half in half like I'm doing here, and I press that. I'll do this again on the other side, fold and press that all the way down. And then I'm going to fold and press the whole thing. Then I take it over to my sewing machine and I sew just right on the edge down both sides. And then I'll go back to the instructions and I'll cut the tube into 5 equal 3.5 inch sections. And there'll be a little bit left over, and you don't need that. Time to pin the belt loops into place. So you can really make these wherever you want. Here I'm pinning them to the front, the inside corners of the pockets, front pockets, and then I will pin one along each side seam and then one to the center back. Feel free to baste these into place if you want to do that. I usually just keep them pinned and then remove those pins as I'm sewing the waistband on. So speaking of waistband, press the unnotched long edge of your waistband up by 3/8 of an inch with the wrong sides touching. And then with the right sides touching, pin the notched side of the waistband to the top of the pants. And the notches will match up with the center back, and the ends of the waistband, once it's pinned, you'll notice that they extend past the center front fly pieces, and this is intentional. You will trim them later on. Starting at the left center front edge, you will stitch all the way around the waistband, ending at the right center front edge. So sew nice and slow. And here my belt loops are pinned underneath, so I'm just being really careful that whenever I know that a pin is coming up, I just slow down a little bit and remove it. And here I am at the front. Once it's completely attached, you will press the entire waistband up and away from the main pants over the seam allowance. Give that a good iron. And then step 33, you'll take the folded edge of the waistband, that top edge, and you'll pull it down with the right sides touching towards the waistband, and overlap it about 1/16 of an inch. Pin it into place and then trim the waistband so that there's a 1/2 inch seam allowance extending past each center front edge. And then you'll stitch right there at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Or what I do usually is just check from the inside where I can really see the distance from the edge to the inside fly. Just be careful. Try to line up that edge so that it's flush. And then make sure you do this on the other side of the waistband too. Trim the excess seam allowance there. And then move on to step 34, which is to flip your waistband right side out. And on the inside of the waistband, you want to make sure that the folded edge covers your seam by about 1/16 of an inch. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/16 of an inch, but you want it to just barely cover your seam, and this is really helpful for the next step. So here I'm just using my fingers to see where the seam on the other side is, and just make sure that this inside seam is just past it, and then pin. And I'm lining up my pins from the outside. If you can see here, my pins are on the right side of my pants because that's where I'm going to be sewing next. So just take your time here. This step is kind of tricky. Just use your fingers to see where they line up, and just make sure that that inside fabric is just pulled just a little further. And here I am giving my waistband a really nice press all the way around, making sure those front corners are really nice and square, and then moving on to the next step. So orient your pants so that you will be sewing from the front, and you're going to stitch in the ditch in that seam between the main pants and the waistband all the way around the waistband. And this is where it's important that that folded edge goes just past this seam, because when you stitch in the ditch, it'll catch just the tiniest edge of that folded part in the back. So just be really careful here. So really slowly remove those pins as you go. And then the goal is that when you flip your pants inside out, there will be no exposed raw seam, that folded edge will just barely cover that seam, and it makes the inside of your pants look so clean and professional. Alright, for step 36, I actually was running out of thread, so I didn't do this on the current pants that I'm working on, but I'm showing you what I did on my shorts. So you're going to stitch around that waistband starting at the center back, and you'll stitch all the way around your entire waistband like I do here. Okay, so back to my other pants. We are going to press these belt loops up, turn it under about a 1/2 of an inch so that it's flush with the top of the waistband, press, pin, and stitch back and forth a couple times, about 1/8 of an inch from the top to secure. And make sure you do this with all 5 belt loops. Work your way around. Here I'm just kind of pressing it with my fingers and then stitching it, going over just a couple times. Just make sure it's really nice and sturdy. You don't want your belt loops to pop off when you're out and about, when you're pulling your pants up. As you're finishing sewing your belt loops into place, go ahead and grab your waistband piece and mark your buttonhole on on your waistband, I do this in chalk, and it begins about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the waistband. And then I'll take this to my other sewing machine, do a practice buttonhole first, and then sew my buttonhole into place. Here I'm using some fray check just to keep that buttonhole from fraying. Then once that's dry, rip it open and use a pen or chalk or something to mark your button placement through your cut buttonhole. The marking should be on the inside closest to the center front edge of your buttonhole. And then make a hole. Here I'm using denim buttonholes. I'll have them linked down below. They're pretty awesome. You smack them in with a hammer on an anvil. It's really, really rewarding. And then the last step, you'll fold the bottom raw edge of the pants up about a 1/4 inch with the wrong sides touching and press. And then you'll fold them up by another 3 inches or so. But you can really customize the exact length that you want. So just try them on a couple times, and then you can adjust and make whatever length pants that you want. Make sure you have the exact length on both sides. This is very important. So make sure you cut off the exact amount on each side if you do cut them. And I top stitch from the right side. So once I've folded my hem underneath, I think here I'm stitching at about 1.5 inches. So I folded at a 1/4 inch, and then I pressed up again 1.5 inches, and mine are ever so slightly cropped. And this is my perfect length of lander pants. Give them a good press once you finish stitching, and then you're all done. That's the last step, step 40. Congratulations on finishing your pants. I hope you wear them so proudly into the world, knowing that they were made with love and purpose by your hands. And I hope you feel the magic of sewing your own clothes. It feels like the greatest superpower, and I don't know if I'll ever get over it. Hope you love your pants and make many more.